Welcome everybody to another episode with Astrid, your APD, your dietitian with T, no C, and I'm going to be having today Stan Efferding with me. I've got quite a few questions for him. I'm really excited. We're going to follow very similar structure I've been doing before. So I'm going to have several questions in general that I've got for him. And then we're going to jump on these rapid fire Q&A, overrated, underrated, true and false. And the new version that we'll got today is fill in the blank. So I greatly excited, give me an statement, and he will come back to me saying, this is the word to fill that blank. Let me get him on. How are you, my friend?
You know, I'm blessed. For those that aren't aware, I sold my home in Las Vegas last summer and packed up and shipped everything to American Samoa, where my wife was born and raised. And so we now live on a tiny little rock out in the middle of the South Pacific Ocean, about 5 hours off the coast of New Zealand. You think maybe Fiji's an hour away.
You're closer to me now than before because I am in Australia.
Yeah, I went to Brisbane about, 4 months ago.
You should have told me.
It's a straight shot from Samoa.
Hopefully I get to meet you in person one day. But for now, let's just have a very great conversation. I've got a pile of information that I need from you today, and a lot of my audience, and I think your audience as well, going to be very eager to hear your answers. So one of the things that I was talking to you over messages was about your recent projects and the things that you have been doing the most recently for, and you updated your vertical diet book. What was some of the things that pushed you to expand and rework the original textbook you had before?
Well, you know, the industry is always updating their information, and there's more and more nuance, and there's more and more questions from clients all over the world. We've had the chance to work with thousands of people now, and the purpose of the vertical diet was really a document to help answer a lot of those questions for people. And it's a very broad range. It's not just diet, as of course you know. It's got blood testing and blood pressure, and it's got obviously nutrition and training. So it's got a lot of answers a lot of different questions for people, in addition to providing meal plans and grocery shopping lists, etc. We tried to make it pretty easy, quick start guide for people to, if they wanted to lose weight or gain weight. And that's another thing, is that the vertical diet addresses people on both ends of the spectrum, because I spent 25 years both bulking to become a power lifter and then dieting down to single-digit body fat to compete as a bodybuilder. So I've experienced both ends of the spectrum, and as have many of the clients I've worked with. I've trained people to get on the Olympia stage, both men and women, and I've also trained people to compete as the world's strongest man. So very different needs and desires for those two different groups. And the vertical diet, you know, I launched it almost 10 years ago now. It was really everything I wanted my clients to know and to do, and to provide them some resources. We put about, there's over 250 peer-reviewed, published research articles, videos, and with links that people can see, you know, take a deeper dive into some of these topics if they so desire. It expanded over the years. I came out with Vertical Diet 2.0, Vertical Diet 3.0, and now I'm on Vertical Diet 4.0 over the last 10 years. And I provide each update for free to anybody who bought a previous version, to make sure that they get, you know, the latest information. Some things, you know, I've not necessarily certain I've completely changed my mind on. It was a pretty solid document to begin with, and I've worked closely with Dr. Damon McCune, who's a PhD RDN, who was director of dietetics for UNLV, taught in the exercise phys department there, and he and I got together some 6-7 years ago now and launched the Vertical Diet 2.0 together, to just make sure we updated it with all the latest scientific information. But there's a lot of nuance, and you know, I wanted people to understand that, as you know, it's not easy just to give a blanket answer. There's always people who respond differently, and people have different goals, obviously. And so I wanted to make sure that that I just included the answers to many of the questions I had gotten that weren't previously answered, and to make sure that I attached, revised some of my recommendations to include the latest literature, because things have changed pretty significantly over the last 10 years. Of course, we have, the GLP-1 agonists, which have been a huge change, and then even in the training department, we've learned a lot about training, about what drives hypertrophy and strength that we simply weren't certain of even as recently as 10 years ago. So that was the goal, and that was with the Vertical Diet 4.0, and now I'm kind of on to trying to write a book called The World's Strongest Diet, which is more specific to athletes who need to gain size and strength for competition, high school, collegiate, and professional, as well as off-season bodybuilders, powerlifters, football linemen, people who struggle gaining mass and strength. And it's going to be a real specific document for that.
I've got a few questions for you later on that particular project. Now, I do have one thing that I really want to know from you in terms of this new 4.0 version. What do you think will surprise the most to those people who are reading this for the first time? From bulking, from blood work, from digestion to elite athletes and recovery. What is the most newer thing that you want to talk to?
I don't think much in there will surprise people if they're just reading it for the first time. They'll find it to be pretty solid information supported by, I think, the consensus among the domain-specific experts in each field. And I make sure and reference those. This isn't the world according to Stan. I did a lot of the research. I studied exercise science at the University of Oregon way back in the late 80s. And so this has been a life pursuit for me as a personal trainer and an athlete and a coach. And having been coached and competed for many, many years, then collaborated with great athletes and certainly, as I mentioned, academic professionals. And so if you're reading it for the first time, I think you'll notice that it's more than anything, it's very broad in its scope. While still being pretty simple to follow, because I do have a quick start guide. It endeavors to answer just about any question I've ever been asked. And so it is 270 pages, and it does have a lot of references and resources in addition to that can help get you down rabbit holes if you intend to go there. That book was written for the academics. It was well supported by the literature. So I don't think there's anything in there that would be a shocker. I think if you were to ask me what's different from 1.0 to 4.0, you might find that some of my stalwart followers from 10 years ago would see there's a couple of things in there that have evolved, and I've come to view somewhat differently and provide a significant amount of nuance to.
From the information and the things that you have been looking into for all these years, have you changed your stance on certain things that you were previously really, really strong thinking about certain statements, certain ways that you go about certain things, and now you have changed your mind?
I think two things in particular that I've evolved on, which are they're kind of married together, and that's saturated fats and polyunsaturated fats. I came out pretty hard against seed oils 10 years ago. When you looked at the graphs, you noticed that there was a perfect correlation between seed oil consumption and the obesity epidemic over the last 40 years. And correlation does not equal causation. Largely, the association there was having to do with the fact that the vast majority of ultra-processed hyperpalatable foods contain seed oils. And so that was actually the source of the problem, which we now know from Kevin Hall studies and others, that those ultra-processed hyperpalatable foods they just bypass the satiety mechanism, and they're easy to overconsume. Riding along with those foods over the last 40 years has been seed oils as an ingredient. And I went down the rabbit hole with Gary Taubes and Nina Teicholz and others who tried to demonize seed oils, and I certainly got into that camp largely because of their association with excess caloric intake. Now the nuance there is that in fact we are consuming too many hyperpalatable ultra-processed foods, and they are largely do have seed oils with them, probably 70% of our diet now. A lot of the processed packaged foods at the stores, and of course a lot of the fast foods. Still not a fan of seed oils used in deep frying, reheated seed oils. We do see some problems with those in terms of inflammation and potentially disease risk. And those are, repeatedly reheated oils. And I also mentioned in a video that I did, I actually did have a rant called "The Real Poison That's Killing Us." And in there I talked about seed oils and their association with calorie overconsumption. But I did say in there that I am biased. I said it in the video. I am biased. They are a poison to me. I'm allergic. And I mentioned in the video that they give me gastric distress. But that doesn't give claim to state that they're a problem for everyone. In my Iceland rant some 8 years ago, it's got almost 7 million views now. I spent 2 full hours going over almost every aspect of the first vertical diet. In there, I spoke about the fact that there's a lot of foods that cause allergies for some people. Dairy is one that a lot of people, will claim has, adverse outcomes, but it's really for those people who are either allergic or intolerant. And the tolerance exists on a spectrum, of course. And then I also mentioned in there that things like peanuts, anaphylactic shock. That doesn't mean that everybody's allergic to peanuts. And then other shellfish, eggs. I mean, there's a whole host of different foods, even FODMAPs for some people, which I think gave rise to a lot of these folks claiming that vegetables were going to kill you. We've seen plenty of those people on the internet, social media over the last many years, because some people do suffer from IBS, and FODMAPs can aggravate that problem. But those are acute conditions that should be managed by a gastroenterologist, and the intervention is typically a low FODMAP diet, at least as an initial intervention. But anyhow, to keep excusing myself, we just don't have the research to support that seed oils with normal use, say with salads or what have you, are inflammatory, are uniquely cause you to gain body fat, in the absence of a calorie surplus, and that kind of segues into saturated fats, because we do see research showing that saturated fats, even in the absence of a calorie surplus, will progress NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And certainly in a calorie surplus. In addition to that, saturated fats will decrease the number of cholesterol receptors on the liver, causing an increase in ApoB and LDL, which can lead to increased cardiovascular disease risk. And so while I've always had a lower fat diet, because I've dirty bulked early in the 90s and got up, throw over 300 pounds and got fat, it does appear that fat is easier to store as fat, particularly when you're in a significant calorie surplus. But I've always recommended less than 30% of total calories as fat in a diet for athletes, and less than 10% of total calories as saturated fat. I used a variety of lean sources, whether it be fat-free Greek yogurt, 96.4 beef, top sirloin steak. I mean, you could get, just as an aside, you could get 100% of your daily protein from top sirloin steak and still only be at about 4 to 6% saturated fat as a percentage of total calories. So there are certain foods, when I talk about saturated fats, I can't paint with a broad brush, because saturated fats from dairy do not seem to elevate LDL. Saturated fats from cheese do not seem to elevate LDL. Now, that's not so true of butter, unfortunately, because once you've churned the dairy, you've destroyed the milk fat globulin membrane that appears to be the reason why it's protective of elevating LDL. I don't mean to get too deep into the weeds here, but these are important points, specific to the question that you asked me. And so I've always recommended to keep total saturated fats low, because we've had for some years now the literature suggesting that does increase NAFLD, and that will progress metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, etc. And so that's what I do with a lot of my larger athletes, whether it be Lane Johnson from the Philadelphia Eagles, or it was Brian Shaw, 4-time world's strongest man, or Hafthor Bjornsson, former world's strongest man. All of these large athletes have to eat a lot of calories. and they just to support their mass and their workload. And so I've always proposed that they should keep their fats low under a condition like that, and because of just as I just mentioned in terms of metabolic syndrome, but also because the carbohydrates, you have an opportunity for those to be used as liver glycogen or muscle glycogen, or to be utilized for performance, for anaerobic performance. And so at least there's some opportunity for those not to be converted to fat quite as easily, and they don't seem to accelerate liver fat quite as fast as, say, saturated fat. So probably those two things are the biggest ones that I've taken a roundabout and tried to provide more nuance to is polyunsaturated fats and saturated fats and their role in inflammation, as mentioned, metabolic syndrome and just weight gain in general.
I agree with you in those things, and I think there is still a lot of controversy around these topics. But I think there's also a topic you brought up, which is talking about certain foods, meat alternatives, or anything to do with meat, and how controversial is this topic and the research behind meat. Where do you stand with meat, cardiovascular health, and whether it is good or bad for you? Because at the end of the day, not all meats are created equal. So where do you stand with this?
Not all meat is created equal, and I think there are some extraordinary benefits, particularly for female, what do we call them, bodybuilder physique, figure, bikini, wellness, in the professional dieting industry, which I was training women back in the early 90s. I was worked at a gym, and I was training people for competition, and I've seen even as far back as then, I saw the female triad. I saw women suffering from amenorrhea, cessation of the menstrual period. I saw bone mineral density loss. We saw even hypothyroidism, anemia from iron deficiency. All of those things I saw in that industry back then, and unfortunately, as time has progressed and that industry has become so popular, that now we've got general population soccer moms are following those same diets, and they're experiencing a lot of these same problems in a much grander scale. So it's become quite dangerous. And so red meat in particular just provides so many nutrients, iron being the major one, because women tend to suffer from anemia to a greater degree due to the menstrual cycle. And so what happens, generally speaking, is that when women start on these diets, copying the diets of the professional dieters from the fitness industry, they end up demonizing a whole host of different foods. They go on what I refer to as the guru diet, and they start eating egg whites and white fish and broccoli and a scoop of almond butter, and that tends to just about be everything they eat in a day. And the problem with that is, they demonize the yolk in the egg, which is full of choline and biotin, which is, for skin, hair, and nails. And they demonize red meat, and now your iron and your creatine and B12 and carnitine, a host of other nutrients you start to lose out on. They demonize dairy quite regularly, and that's really important to get sufficient calcium. I mean, Stu Phillips has been talking for some time now, PhD exercise phys, McMaster University. You're quite familiar with his work about dairy having an independent effect, independent of protein, for BMI improvement and performance, especially for women, and how he's recommending 3 serves a day. And of course, that gets us into allergies and intolerances, and certain people can't handle as much lactose as others, but we do have lactose-free options. And so dairy is another thing that gets demonized. Women start pulling salt out, of all things, and of course, they end up getting tired as a result of that. And fruit is another one on the list that seems to get demonized, of all things. Particularly berries and oranges, low sugar fruits that are highly satiating. It's a shame to see all of that taken out of a healthy diet just for the purpose of competing in competition, and then for that to be mimicked by women who see fitness competitors in such great shape and follow those types of diets. What they don't see behind the scenes, which you're well aware of, having dealt with a lot of these competitors and competed yourself, is that we do see large instances of the female triad and anemia and eventually hypothyroidism and hair loss, and then, you know, quite often depression, and they end up at the doctor getting prescription medication for depression as a result of all of these restrictions that they've been going through. So I think that red meat is important for that reason. I know I kind of veered off, but red meat is kind of, for me, the foundation of, for women in particular, a diet. And again, red meat is many things. It's not hot dogs. It's not bacon. It's not, you know, processed meats. You want to look at unprocessed meats. And you also, if you have a predisposition for elevated LDL, which is an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease, you want to watch how fat the meats are. I mentioned the low fat content of top sirloin as compared to, say, a ribeye. Not a good food, bad food conversation, but looking at them as part of a whole, you know, a dietary pattern, they can certainly have a place. And I've always been a big proponent. I've eaten plenty of red meat throughout my career. But you know, you have to put that into a diet that's got all of the important healthy things in it.
I love that. And I think it is so important to bring the nuance of these topics and the importance of different population, how the requirements getting more importantly noticed, especially when we think about the amount of neglect of certain nutrients that go into these diets, especially if they don't do this just for a short term, but for a very long time. And most of the times, these females, specifically when you speak about female competitors, they are likely going to stick with something that they feel is working for them, that keeps them physically looking how they wanted to look, but behind the scenes they are malnourishing their body, they're lacking of a lot of nutrients. And as you rightly said, there's a host different things that are going to come as a consequence of having these nutrient deficiencies in the first place. So I can definitely say, including all this wide range of groups from these different food groups, as is going to be a major difference in not just on your health, but also in your performance, the way you recover, the way you just overall feel on a regular basis.
I'm so glad you said that, and I skipped over that, but performance. And that is actually the primary focus when you're dieting and trying to retain lean mass, particularly if you're competing. That performance, that bout of exercise that you do going all the way into the show is of critical importance. That's what determines whether or not you're going to keep or lose muscle mass. And if you're getting weaker, like you said, you get tired. If you're getting weaker going into a show, you're losing muscle, period. They go hand in hand. You cannot get bigger without getting stronger. Now, you can get stronger without getting bigger, but you cannot get bigger without getting stronger. If you're losing strength, you're losing muscle tissue. And that's often what happens going into a show. And I can remember, 30 years ago, I remember the NPC chairwoman talking to women before a competition, telling them, look, if all you're focused on is the scale, then you're not going to be very successful in this industry. You need to focus on building muscle. And that's what's going to change the shape of your physique. I've had women go on diets for 90 days and lose 2 pounds, but lose 6 inches on their waist and get tapers around the knees where they used to have kind of those soft knees. And all of the muscles, the shape of the muscle is really what they're looking for, is the look. And so we start measuring performance. We start measuring not what you weigh on the scale, but what you can do in the gym. And my metric for that is strength. It will always be. And because it's measurable and it's progressible. And I know that if you're getting stronger, then you're adding lean muscle tissue. And we know that lean muscle tissue is smaller than fat tissue. And so even if you don't change the scale much, you're going to have a very different physique, smaller waist and those insertions and all the shape and the flow that what you really want. And that's going to be hugely dependent on your diet, as you mentioned, and over restriction and cutting too many foods out of your diet is going to result in poor performance in the gym. And that stimulus, that 1 hour or whatever it is you spend in the gym training, is the single most important thing for achieving your goals, particularly if you're competing.
One thing that I feel like it is so underrated is the programming and the intention of going into the gym and training hard. Now, I see a lot of women really stuck in the fear of they're going to put on a lot of muscle and they're going to look bulky. And I just feel for them because it is so hard for women to put on muscle. I wish it was that easy.
I do too.
But you have to put a lot of effort, intensity, intention, and time under tension to actually build and change your physique. Now, when I think about it, for you, what is the biggest and the most important thing when it comes to reshape your body? You know, we have the diet, obviously, we have the training, we have to be consistent with it. But mostly, I'm sort of like thinking when it comes to hitting the gym and following a program, what is for you the number one thing that is missing perhaps for you to see results?
Let me reiterate what you said first. It's so important, is that no, you're not going to get huge and wake up one morning and look like Ronnie Coleman if you're working out with weights, especially ladies, like you say. It's so hard for them to put on muscle. What ultimately happens, and I hate saying things like this because it always feels like I'm attacking the person or blaming them. And this is a phenomenon that you're well aware of, the constrained energy model of dieting and compensation. What generally happens is that people will go in and start working out really, really hard, and then they get tired and they come home and they sit more and eat more. They get tired and hungry and they sit more and eat more. And that's what Herman Ponzer's constrained energy model seems to support, and his theory of compensation, and which is, I've mentioned many times before in interviews that I don't recommend an extraordinary amount of extra exercise activity because we know that it's not nearly as effective as one might think, and that really the energy intake side of the equation is probably, and I'll throw a number out here that's just completely bro science, but it's probably 90+% of what's responsible for weight loss is just maintaining a calorie deficit, just how much you eat. And the exercise component is great for health, and I encourage people to always to exercise, but when you start adding more and more exercise, you get potentially, you get diminishing returns. Your body gets more efficient at doing the work, so you burn fewer calories per minute or hour invested, and you get hungry and tired, and you go home and sit more and eat more. So that is a very real phenomenon that's been fettered out in the science, and that's generally what happens. And again, blaming the victim. They start working out, they end up generally eating more and gaining body fat, and thinking that they're bulking, and that's not the case. It's not muscle that they're gaining. But back to the kind of workouts. So what's most important? And I think what we know now, and this isn't to say all women, and we know very well now, we just look no further than Brett Contreras' group over there at the Gout Lab. All of his women train extraordinarily hard, and that's what he drives for them to progress. They lift with a high degree of effort and frequency. And if I were to pick the top two things, I would suggest that frequency and effort are the top two things. If you do 8 sets once a week, it's not nearly as effective as doing 4 sets twice a week. So let's just say for glutes, for instance, if you're going to go in and work your legs or your glutes, you should do that at least twice a week. We know that hypertrophy, the muscles are always growing or shrinking, and hypertrophy generally after 48 to 72 hours, the hypertrophy stimulus has maximized, and now you're going to start seeing some muscle loss. It'd be small, of course, because you're training, but if you want to continue to progress, then you should get another stimulus 72 hours later or so. Twice a week could be fine. I think Stu Phillips just came out with another report analyzing a huge systematic review of all the hypertrophy and strength literature, and suggested that we did see a significant benefit from training twice a week as opposed to once. And 3 times a week didn't seem to be much better, if any. It was not significant. And so frequency is the one thing. Train every body part twice a week, or at least those parts that you want to improve. Some people are satisfied with the size of their quads, but might want a tighter, fuller glutes. And so you could do less or no quads if you wanted to, if you were perfectly happy with the size of your quads. And then just focus on glutes and hamstrings twice a week, and then shoulders for women typically tend to like to do shoulders, and maybe not a lot of chest work. It's real individualistic as to you get to pick and choose, because only the muscles that you train are gonna grow, and so it's your canvas, and you get to paint what you want on it, and that's the beautiful thing about training, is you can actually make changes. And second is the effort, and this is as I just mentioned with Brett Contreras' group. They train extremely hard, and I think that's the second most important thing, is that as much as I hate to say it, I just traveled through the U.S. 2 weeks ago. I flew from here to Honolulu and then to Las Vegas. I did a seminar in Toronto, Canada, and then I flew down to Iowa to visit my pops. He's 94 years old now. He's in a nursing home there in Iowa, about a mile from my brother. And so I visited him, then went to Cincinnati, and I did a seminar in Cincinnati. And then I flew down to Dallas and did a podcast with Jordan Syatt. And then I went up and did a podcast with Mark Bell and trained with him. And then I went over and did to San Jose to visit with the Mind Pump folks and did a podcast there. Then back to Vegas and back home. So I had quite a busy couple of weeks there in the States. That was about a 2-week, about 17 days I was there total, and I visited all those locations. And one of the things I had the opportunity to see, as I often do when I go from gym to gym to gym, is I get to see people train. And oftentimes, the example would be that if someone's doing like side laterals, a lot of times, this isn't men or women, but it matters for both. Okay, it's the same. Men and women grow the same. They should train, the same things matter for both in terms of frequency, intensity, and all of that. There's no specific type of training for women unless they're just choosing different body parts. But I'll see them do a set, and they might do 10 reps when they could have done 20. That's not a sufficient stimulus, and that's where we talk about effort. So we talked frequency twice a week. Next to be effort. You really have to get to the point where you have an involuntary slowing of the repetition, meaning you're within a rep or two of failing. So if you do 10 reps, you probably shouldn't have been able to do 12. The 10th rep should have been, and you can picture that on any movements, to where as you get closer and closer to failure, the bar speed slows down. And that's involuntary. Even though you're trying as hard as you can, you struggle to finish the repetition. That is when you've recruited the muscle fibers that are going to stimulate the muscle fibers that are going to grow. I often have been asked for decades now, when I train women, they'll say, how many reps? And there's no answer to that question. All the reps is what I answer. So just start lifting. I'll tell you when you're done, because I'll see that their level of effort is such that the bar, now they're involuntarily slowing. Their tempo starts to slow down a little bit. Now you can do that at any rep range. So you could lift 80% of your 1 rep max for 5 reps, or you could lift 50% of your 1 rep max for 12 or 14 reps, or you could lift 30% of your 1 rep max for 30 reps. You'll get the same hypertrophy response if each of those sets is taken to within a rep or two of failure, if you have the involuntary slowing. Having said that, I typically don't recommend the higher rep stuff, because you get significantly more fatigue from it. Fatigue being, when you're a perceived level of effort, your brain starts to get a little bored or a little tired. And an accumulation of metabolites, now we believe it's calcium ion and accumulation that causes the DOMS, the delayed onset muscle soreness. So I kind of like to stay in the lower rep range. I've generally been recommending like 5 to 8 reps lately. Can you do 12? Sure. And get the same result? Sure. You're going to get better strength results from the 5 to 8 because strength is specific. But I can measure it better. I can measure 5 to 8 better. And by that, I mean probably the next key component after frequency and effort is going to be progression. I know some people would want to throw volume in there, but I think the progression is more important than the volume. Because if you're progressing, then you don't need to add more volume. You can, but you don't need to. And progression means, are you getting one more rep or lifting 5 more pounds over time? It's not going to happen linearly week after week, but you know, if you're in there working hard and constantly pushing yourself with the same exercises, you should be able to get 1 more rep or 5 more pounds. And that progression of getting stronger is what is actually you expressing an adaptation that's already occurred. Now we're getting really deep into the science because some people believe that you add weight to get stronger, but really you get stronger so you can add weight. The adaptation has already occurred, therefore you can go in and express that adaptation. Because if you move a heavier weight slower, it's not necessarily indicative of having progressed, right? This probably more than our audience wanted to hear today, but the big 3 are frequency, train twice a week, effort, trained within a rep or 2 of failure, and then progress your loads over time. And then from there, if you're not making progress, you might have to fiddle with your volume, add a couple extra sets here or there.
I do have a question. You mentioned in terms of the rep range, your favorite is between 5 and 8.
Yeah.
But I see that a lot of people, if they don't know how to train, the amount of weight at the load becomes more a risk of getting injured if you're trying to lift very heavy, but you don't have the technique as a very strong baseline. So I think it is important to add there, provided that you have the basics and the foundation of a really good technique for that particular exercise, then you probably can go lower rep. And in my personal preference, I like between 12 and 15 because it is just a much gentle approach to my joints. And I feel like for the most part, I get the same benefits and I still get strong, but it's just not pushing it too far. And then I feel like my joints adapt a lot better and less pain. Again, there could be different exercises that are probably less exposed to be so sore at the level of the joints as compared to others. But in your opinion, where would you stand in this situation when it comes to injury risk, joint overload, and recovery, as well as progression?
You're touching on a lot of things that get pretty nuanced, and you're absolutely right. You can gain strength in the 12 rep range. There's no question. You can gain strength in the 30 rep range, for that matter. I think Stu's research also showed that. You can also get improved bone mineral density and from lighter loads, or even walking, for that matter, or jogging. So any kind of training, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be very heavy or very hard, is going to give you some great bone mineral density results. And beginners are going to get results no matter what they do, as long as they go into the gym and lift something. They're going to see those newbie gains, and you know, it's not until such point that plateaus a little bit that we start to refine things. And you mentioned something very important. That's in terms of injury risk. Of course, 65% of injuries in the gym are a result of dropping a weight on yourself. So you're probably more likely to do that than you are to hurt yourself from actually lifting, because injuries associated with lifting are far less than almost any sport you can imagine: soccer, football, jogging, tennis, just because they're all so dynamic, and weightlifting is really safe, generally speaking. I try and mitigate some of that by using machines a lot, because I can measure better off a machine, because it kind of controls all the variables, you know, whether it's balance or trying to incorporate other muscles into the movement. And so I like some of the isolatory movements. If I'm doing chest, I'll do a seated bench press machine, because you know, now we don't have a whole lot of coordination to work with. And for legs, I would prefer, you know, hack squat or leg press, because for the same reason. Now you don't got people, you know, moving their hips all around and changing their back angle to try and get the bar to come up when things get hard. So that's one of the ways I mitigate that. And then as far as the joints go, we don't have any evidence to suggest that a heavier load is any more damaging than a lighter load, mainly because the body is not degenerative, it's regenerative, and whatever load you put on it, it'll adapt to that. I guess the caveat to that is that is just training beyond your current level of fitness. As long as it's gradual, as long as the adaptation is gradual, we call that load management.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I did a video once where I talked about the best way to recover from training, and I spent all my time talking about eating and sleeping and taking 10-minute walks and blah blah blah. And some people would throw in whatever passive therapy they enjoyed. I generally have said things that are done to you or for you are not as nearly as effective as things you do for yourself in terms of rehabilitation. And that was kind of a knock on passive therapies in general, because we know that any type of movement is far better than anything somebody does to you. But one of the things I probably should have mentioned in that video is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and load management comes well before worrying about what to do after a workout to recover. And so, whatever your current state of fitness is, you don't want to go in the gym and try and exceed that by too significant a factor, particularly if you're a beginning lifter. Just something as simple as a novel stimulus is going to cause a lot of soreness. So you might be able in your first workout to go in and do one set, leaving 5 reps in reserve, and you'll get actually a stimulus from that. And you can come back the next time and train a little harder and a little closer to failure, and you can manage that DOMS. And at the same time, you're starting to build up, some tolerance for heavier loads, because again, the body is regenerative. It will adapt over time, and we don't see more injuries in the 5-rep range than we see in the 12 to 15. Now, when you get to competition and you're pushing your body for a heavy single, that's a different animal. And so, it kind of, a lot of nuance to the conversation. But as mentioned, you can pick any rep range. The important thing is that, I probably should have started with this, that you should enjoy it. Because we know that compliance is the science, and if I assign you a bunch of exercises that you absolutely hate, you're not going to do it for any length of time. I've talked about that in terms of cardio. You put somebody 40 minutes on the treadmill, what's the likelihood they're going to do that consistently for long term? It's just so monotonously boring, and it just, yeah. So most important thing is I hope that people can find a trainer that helps them enjoy the workout, rather than, and I'm not even going to say how many, but I've seen a lot. I've done over 200 seminars in 20 countries in all 50 states, and I've met a lot of trainers, and some of them pride themselves on how hard they crush their clients, and sometimes their clients even, at least initially, will talk about, oh, that was a great workout, because they were, heaving and breathing hard and sweating, and maybe it was a bunch of battle ropes and burpees, which really didn't provide a hypertrophy stimulus, and that's not something people will tend to do long term. So the most important thing, I think, when you get somebody in the gym as a newbie is to take them around and find exercises they enjoy. And that's kind of one of the reasons I like the heavier lifts, is because at least initially, when I get a new client in, I want to get them hooked. I want to find a way to get them hooked so that the gym becomes something they look forward to. And one of the ways I do that is if they can increase their strength, and it's very obvious and measurable and repeatable. If they come in and maybe try a trap bar deadlift. It's one of my favorite, because there's a low, very low learning curve, and they just come in and grab the thing and they stand up. And on day one, they lift, maybe the 25-pound plates on each side, and you have them do 5 reps. Well, when they come back 3 days later, they're able to get 6 or 7 reps, or they're able to add 5 pounds. That right there is immediate feedback, reinforcing that they got stronger. And if they do that 2 more times and end up doing 50 pounds on each side for 5 reps, now they're telling their son and their husband and, about how strong they are, and they want to arm wrestle their son, and that to me is a way to really get someone hooked on the same thing I got hooked on in high school and college. Just the feeling of training, how great it feels, and seeing the progress in which such immediate feedback, which is a great thing about lifting weights, is that you each time you go in, you should, at least as a beginner, particularly because of what we understand is neural adaptation, you're just getting more coordinated at the movement and practiced at it, and so you're going to be able to, your muscles are starting to learn to work together to contract and perform that movement. You're going to get 6-8 plus weeks as a beginner of just neural adaptation, where your nervous system gets good at it. Not much different than learning to shoot free throws. You're just going to get more of them in the basket as you continue to practice. And so I leverage that, even though I know it's neural adaptation, I leverage that into immediate feedback for strength improvement so that they get hooked, and next thing you know, they're chasing their own PRs. And that to me is kind of where I start and finish a workout. Is today's upper body, you're going to do this exercise and that exercise. Last time you did this many reps with this weight. Can you beat it today? Can we set a PR? Can we consistently try and beat the book? Look at your card, see the exercise, the load and reps you did last time. Can we beat that? And that is immediately rewarding. So that's probably one of the major reasons why I focus on that 6 reps to begin with, or 5 reps, setting PRs.
Makes sense. I love that.
Yeah.
Now I want to move to a really fun part, which is true and false. And I'm going to make a statement, and you will let me know whether you think it's true, whether you think it's false. We keep it brief because I have quite a few, and then we will move to overrated, underrated. Okay. So are you ready?
I'll try my best. You know how long-winded I am.
I know, but let's keep it very, very sharp. Okay, number 1, true and false. If your blood work sucks, your gains won't matter at all.
100% true. I'm a huge fan of getting blood work.
Number 2, VO2 max training is just for endurance athletes.
Oh, not at all. Nope, it's great for recovery.
What else do you think why VO2 max is not just for endurance?
Well, because in order to recover from training, it's very helpful to have very healthy cellular function so that you can actually and to perform in training. If oxygen debt becomes a limiting factor, then are you maximizing your training stimulus? You
can clean bulk on a fast food budget.
Yeah, I've said before that calories are king, and we talked about the fact that 95% of health benefits are realized simply from weight loss itself, irrespective of diet. As much as I hate to say it, because I've got a diet and I consider it to be a very healthy diet, but most of the health results are driven by weight loss. And so if you're going to bulk on dirty foods, you just want to be careful it's not too big of a surplus. And as mentioned before, lower unsaturated fats, because that'll drive NAFLD.
Sometimes we think about fast foods as all being equal, but sometimes we can find takeaways or fast foods within the healthier side as well. A little bit less, like higher palatable, higher saturated fats, and somehow can still fit in within a healthier diet.
Yeah, and really important to mention, I've trained professional athletes. I work with John Jones, the current UFC heavyweight champion, and I would look at the menus of restaurants near him, some of which were fast food restaurants, and pick the menu items that I thought, because those are places he liked to frequent, that I thought would be best for him to choose. And there are choices you can make even at fast food restaurants. And I've done this for high school kids too, whose parents say, well, my son always stops at Carl's Jr. or whatever. No problem. Pick these menu items and avoid these pitfalls. And so absolutely, you can make choices just about anywhere. Number 4,
PCOS can be managed better with food and lifting than just medication alone.
100%. And I have had a lot of clients with PCOS, and literature seems to be pretty clear now, as you're aware, that the main problem with PCOS is appetite dysregulation. That's the main problem. And it's frustrating to say it because, again, it sounds like I'm blaming the victim. But what happens is that these folks end up just not having good satiety, leptin resistance, over too much ghrelin. They're not satiated. They feel hungry all the time. It is an overconsumption. It is energy toxicity that drives the things like the insulin resistance and PCOS. And so as much as I hate to say it, people talk about a lot of very specific things that are with PCOS, but the major thing is we've got to work on satiety. And we've seen this with the GLP-1 agonists, the semaglutide, Ozempic, and Wegovy, and the like. And we don't need to dive down into that rabbit hole, but we've seen that has had a huge impact on helping women with PCOS because if they can lose weight, we know from the bulk of the body of research that it's the weight loss itself that will reverse, that can help manage the symptoms and help reverse the type 2 diabetes.
I agree. Let's move to number 5. The female triad is more common than we think, even among casual lifters. True or false?
Oh, absolutely, that's true. Women tend to have a chronic calorie deficit. They tend to diet all the time, which is the primary driver of the female triad, whether it be amenorrhea. And then, again, as mentioned earlier, eliminating foods, just not enough iron consumption and not enough calcium consumption. Those are the big ones.
Number 6, fatigue is often a recovery problem, not a training problem.
Yeah, I think we just covered that. Yeah, it's load management. Fatigue, you create a lot of that for yourself, training beyond your current level of fitness. So be patient, be gradual.
Yep. Organic food is always better. True or false?
Oh my God, you're going to get me in so much trouble. There's no evidence that organic is healthier than or more nutritious than conventional food. We have tons and tons of research on that now. Organic is a marketing term. And now that's going to cause people to spray off into about 20 other different topics, but generally speaking, and I interviewed the food science babe 8 years ago. We talked about this topic, and it's not gotten any better in terms of people's positions. They're religious about it, and the big thing for me, I don't care where you weigh in on that. The big thing for me is that we don't eat enough fruits and vegetables as it is, and then to discourage a mother who's trying to get her kids to eat fruits and vegetables from doing so when organic is beyond her budget. I think you're doing a disservice. I think that anything you can do to encourage more fruit and vegetable consumption, organic or conventional, is fine. But the literature certainly supports the fact that there's no measurable difference.
I agree. Now, metformin and rapamycin are overhyped for longevity.
Yeah, I believe so. I just don't think that the long-term literature is panned out, particularly for metformin. We have long-term literature for human trials that it's not great for longevity. And it can, for type 2 diabetics, it's certainly a beneficial tool, but for people that are training, it impairs both the hypertrophy response and the cardiovascular benefits of training. So I certainly wouldn't recommend it for anybody, an athlete.
Okay, next one. You can hack your health with supplements and tracking alone.
No, if you have a verifiable deficiency, and this is kind of hard because that exists on a spectrum for a lot of people, but if you've got a deficiency in supplement, then supplementing may help, probably will help, but oftentimes people start thinking that more is better, and we've learned long since that megadosing vitamins can actually be counterproductive. We've seen that in all the research. So I don't think that, there's only a couple of supplements that really work for performance, and the balance of them is just, if you're not deficient, it doesn't really help you much to dump a bunch of money into multivitamins and what have you if you don't have a deficiency.
Training smarter beats training harder after 35.
Yeah, I think I always think that, like you mentioned earlier, that you should train smart. Yeah. And you absolutely have to train with enough effort in order to get results, but you don't want to do that at the cost of injury.
Correct. Now let's move to overrated, underrated. Okay. And this is going to be same thing. I'm going to make a statement and you let me know whether you think it is overrated, underrated, or properly rated if you think that is the case.
Yeah.
Okay. Metformin for lifetime.
Overrated. Yeah, there's no evidence that it helps. And this has been well researched now for I think there was a 10-year trial or longer.
Glucose monitors. Continuous glucose monitors for non-diabetics.
Oh, no, not for non-diabetics. There's no evidence that it helps people.
Overrated?
Way overrated. This whole glucose spike phenomenon that's going on right now on social media is embarrassing at best. It's a normal physiological response to food consumption. If you're not a diabetic, you don't. There's really not much benefit to wearing a glucose monitor.
A lot of people say, well, I am not diabetic, but I feel like it gives me some awareness and some feedback and maybe some accountability, but I don't think it should be the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, you could say the same thing about weighing on a scale. I mean, some people say they have an uncomfortable relationship with the scale, so they don't
Tracking.
weigh. Yeah, it's tracking, and I could see that. But in the literature, we don't see that it improves weight loss outcomes. That's ultimately the thing. If it's a metric, I mean, I get blood tests quite regularly, and I like to look at all those numbers, and most of which probably aren't necessary, and may even be counterproductive. If you talk to Austin Baraki at Barbell Medicine, some folks tend to implement some sort of intervention that is problematic. You know, they start to pathologize themselves. And the same thing could be true of glucose monitors. You know, you could start creating eating disorders, and we just don't have in the evidence to suggest that wearing glucose monitor improves weight loss outcome.
I agree. Now, number 4, shift work and recovery strategies.
Underrated. Shift work is tough, and I have a sleep module in the book, and I talk about it in the seminars. And I take a deep dive into sleep and sleep apnea and sleep optimization. And shift work is the one that always gets me as I'm standing up there preaching to everybody about sleep, and some mom with, you know, a newborn and a 2-year-old at home is like, and, you know, or some doctor or nurse or police, fire, or ambulance that works the night shift is like, I don't have answers for that. It's not a curable situation. There are some things you can do. I just mentioned 2 right off the top of my head. There does seem to be some evidence that avoiding as much of the morning light as possible by maybe wearing blue blocker glasses or something so you get home and get to sleep can be beneficial. And there's some evidence to suggest that you're probably better off not taking 2 shorter sleeps. Some people get home from a night shift and they'll sleep for 3 hours, and then they'll get up and go about their day, and they'll sleep for 3 hours later in the afternoon before their shift starts again. Sleep cycles build on themselves concurrently to where you get longer and longer REM and stage 4 restorative sleep with each subsequent cycle. And if you cleave those in half, you're not going to get the longer restorative sleep that would happen at, say, hour 6 and hour 7. So you're much better off just trying to get a fixed sleeping pattern if you can, and sleep as long as you can.